Hello and welcome to Economy and Markets TV, the show that takes you around the world of economic and financial news. I'm your host, Dave Okenquist, Senior Research Analyst here at Dent. The 4th of July is behind us, and it's time to wrap up the news of the week. And of course, I'm bringing on my friend Rodney Johnson. Rodney, welcome.
Thank you.
Rodney is, of course, the co-founder and senior editor of Dent Research. Rodney, we had Wednesday off, and then we had Thursday off. I'm still thinking about those baby back ribs I smoked on Wednesday. So I have to jump back in here before the weekend, but we are intrepid. Did you have a great holiday, Rodney?
I had a good holiday, and like you say, I was still working yesterday, even though our offices were closed, because economic news keeps happening.
Yep, absolutely. The world does not stop.
Yep.
All right, well, with that, let's kick into the biggest news of the week, which happened to come this morning. The U.S. economy added 213,000 jobs, and then the numbers for April and May were bumped up. Unfortunately, the unemployment number ticked back up to 4%, and wage growth missed expectations. But overall, this looks like a positive report, doesn't it, Rodney?
It's positive, and we've been adding around 200,000 jobs a month, and that number continues. The wage number is the one you kind of look at and go, if we're adding so many jobs and there just aren't that many people looking, and we talked about unemployment rate going up from 3.8 to 4. These are very, very low numbers. We should be getting that wage inflation. And that's the thing everybody's looking at, right? Having wage growth of 2.7% over the last year, right, while you're having inflation running 2.1, you're just not getting a lot of bump. And so clearly, even though businesses are saying, hey, we can't get people, they're not out there bidding for them. They're not pushing it up yet. Don't really know why. Nobody knows why. And so there's something going on there that we're going to have to look further into, because even with this tight market, we're just not getting that wage growth that we should be.
Yeah, I've seen anecdotal reports here and there and news stories of certain companies that they've just been having a really hard time. They've had to boost wages, but we certainly haven't seen that happen nationwide, have we?
We haven't, and it comes back to why businesses don't. And so it flows back to consumers. Businesses will tell you that they still don't have pricing power. The consumers are very quick to switch from one product to another, one supplier to another, and so they're very cost conscious, which of course leads back to our choices. And like all things, it seems these days, goes back to Amazon, right? Amazon is the great deflator of the last 10 years, because at the push of a button or the tap of a screen, we have access to other suppliers for the goods and services we want.
Right.
And so we are very cost conscious, and it does flow all the way from that access to any supplier in the world, all the way down to the worker who's not getting more income.
Yeah, absolutely. Just looking across to Europe on the job front, their unemployment broadly across the European Union fell a bit to 8.4%, which is more than double the U.S. level.
Yep.
Germany is low, they're even lower than us at 3.4%. But looking at countries like Italy, they're at 10.7%, and Spain, nearly 16%. Europe, the job market in Europe is not good.
It's not, and it's worth remembering, as we're over here, as you say, at 4%, and they're sitting at 8.4. They're sitting at 8.4 as a block of, right, 26 countries now, with or without, Britain, 26, 27. And so you have to remember what the difference is over there from the countries that are doing the best, like Germany at 3.4, down to countries like Spain at, plus 15. And so that's why they have such a weird thing going on in Europe, is because even though they're tied together with that currency, they do not have the same economy or the same economic forces. And so it's very difficult for them to affect their individual national economies when they have this one central currency to start to work on things like their unemployment. You look at youth unemployment is almost 17% across the block. And so that's a huge problem. And they haven't worked it out, even though we're 10 years from the financial crisis. Now, of course, their financial crisis, or more of it, hit in 2010, particularly with Greece going bankrupt, and then going bankrupt again, and then going bankrupt again. But they have not worked through all of this. They still have an amazing pile of non-performing loans. Countries like Italy, in terms of their banking sector, are still technically broke. They have more bad loans as a percentage of their banking assets than they have capital cushion. And so these are problems that are really going to come to haunt them when the next downturn happens. It's probably not that far away.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, they haven't fully recovered, so that they don't have that cushion at all. It's just going to be worse and worse and worse if something bad happens. So Hopefully they can figure something out in Europe or come to that solution where maybe a nice slow breakup of the EU where they could sort of manage things a little bit better. But hey, we'll see. It's Europe. Let's move on to our next bit here. We've got the Federal Reserve. Their minutes show that the governors were concerned about tariffs affecting growth, also pushing down long-term interest rates. Rodney, what do you make of that take?
Yeah, this is the thing that's come around, I believe, the last couple of weeks. I think it was brought to the fore by Barron's article about the yield curve potentially inverting with short-term yields moving above long-term yields, or, the reverse, long-term yields falling below short-term. But we have to remember where we are. I mean, long-term yields are around 3%. Short-term yields were at 0 for a very long time. And the Fed started marching them higher. It's not that long-term rates have dropped so much. They've remained around 3%. It's that the short-term rates keep getting closer and closer to them. And so what we haven't seen is the whole yield curve march higher. They didn't all go up together.
Right.
And so as short-term rates are moving higher and long-term rates stay flat, guess what? They get close. I don't think this is a signal that things are looking terrible. I think it's just a continuation of people look out long-term and say, you know what? Growth looks moderate at best, really 2%, maybe even sub 2% for years to come, which is what we've been talking about. And even if you look at the Fed's own data, their estimates are perhaps for 2.5, 2.6% this year, then down a little bit. Their own long-term forecast is, I believe, 1.8, 1.9%. So everybody's in the same boat with what they're looking at, and it's reflected in the rates. Question is, will the Fed actually push short-term rates up to even with long-term rates? That would be really weird. Mm-hmm. So I think that long-term rates around 3% are going to act as a cap on what they do with short-term rates over the next 2 years.
Okay, so it's not as though extra duties on trade imports directly affect long-term rates, but it's more about that general outlook. If they're not so optimistic about the economy, it could weigh on them, right? That's sort of what my interpretation there.
Right, and the tariff part of this is the Fed's looking at it and saying, hey, maybe it's the tariffs are affecting people's view of long-term growth,
right,
which is why they're bidding up the price of bonds, which of course drives down the yield. That's a nice story, but it's a recent story, right? These trade tariffs and TIFs came along in the last 2-3 months. President Trump starts saying, hey, man, we're going to do something about all this.
Right.
The yield curve, or the difference between the short and long-term rates, the yield curve has been flattening ever since the Fed started raising rates a couple of years ago. And so this is a very new explanation for a story that's been going on for years. And so might it be affecting people's outlook for growth right now? Yeah, it could be. But as I said, it's a very recent thing. And I don't think I'm alone in thinking that these trade wars are going to clean up pretty quickly, because Trump has no interest, or hasn't expressed an interest in keeping around long term. He wants to come to some negotiated settlement to, get a better bargaining position.
Right. Yeah. That's just kind of funny. The Fed's like, hey, it's not us and our policies since 2008. It's this new thing that just happened.
Yeah.
But speaking of tariffs, though, we are getting some real stuff going on beyond the normal bluster and trading barbs. So the U.S. just instituted $34 billion, a 25% tax on $34 billion worth of Chinese goods on things from water boilers, X-ray machines, airplane tires, and other. China responded immediately with a $34 billion of their own on soybeans, pork, and electric cars. Rodney, these are the great trade wars of 2018 have finally begun.
And they're real, right?
Yeah.
I mean, these are real tariffs, and so they are causing an issue because it does increase the price of our goods, increase the price of their goods, just like you would think. And so this is where the rubber starts to meet the road, and companies across the United States, as well as in China, start to pay the price. And they pay the price in lower orders. You and I pay the price because we have to pay the price of those goods, and we pay a higher price, of course, with the tariffs on them.
Absolutely.
Interestingly, our markets have reacted by going, this is kind of not what we think should be happening right now. Mm-hmm. And yet our equity markets are kind of, moving along, not at the highs that we've seen this year, but we're not falling either. Whereas the Chinese equity market, the largest, is down by more than 20% from the high. And so they're in full bear territory, whereas we don't have the same reaction, which really shows you the outsized difference of what happens over there about these trade tariffs than over here.
Right.
And so it does have a greater effect on them. Doesn't mean they have to capitulate anytime soon, but it does mean that they're feeling more pain.
Yeah.
One thing that's interesting about tariffs, you have to remember where the money goes. When the government charges a tariff, they get tax revenue.
Yeah.
So we got to be clear on this. What's happening is we're paying higher taxes to the United States government for getting more Chinese goods. And so while that might affect us as consumers and it might affect the Chinese as sellers and the people in between, the people who get the money are the governments.
Yeah. Well, before the income tax was put in 1913, that's how the government got most of its money. Interesting to think.
Stamp tax and tariffs. Absolutely.
Yeah, interesting to think about that. All right, thank you for your take on that. We will definitely keep an eye on tariffs, but for the moment, it doesn't seem like anything that's going to cause a big deal certainly not in the U.S. market, so we're safe for now. Our next thing, are you tired of governments around the world? You can escape the petty squabbling and oppression. Come to Asgardia and free yourself. Did I do a good job on that, Rodney?
I think you did. I think you kind of nailed that. You know, if you're tired of all of the government intervention in your life, you have a choice. You can join the space kingdom of Asgardia and join a movement to actually have a colony on a space satellite, space station, space something. I don't know what exactly it's going to be.
Oh, it's just an orbiting small piece of aluminum. That's the country.
Well, for the moment, it's just a satellite. There's not even any people there, but you can join this movement here on Earth. And the person, this Russian billionaire who started Asgardia as a country, has built it as a way for people to gain access to space without all of the tie-ups and entanglements that happen with governments, because the Outer Space Treaty requires governments to authorize and oversee all space activity. And he's saying, no, it shouldn't be that way. But interestingly, his solution is to create another government. It's like, well, wait a second. Aren't you now part of the problem instead of the solution?
Well, you can't have anarchy. So I don't know what you do there. Can't escape it, right? You have to have rules, some sort of form, things put into a formal sense so that we can all kind of agree to them. Yeah, that sounds like a government.
I wonder if you're a citizen of Asgardia, if you actually, make your citizenship Asgardia, then what happens to your passport? I mean, they say they're going to use smartphones and digital ID, but I think that's going to be really hard for the guy at the customs desk when you're trying to come in and, visit New York or maybe go to Paris for a weekend or something. So I'm not exactly sure where you're supposed to reside when you're a citizen of the space kingdom.
Yeah, I'm not sure how that's a little bit unclear. Now, if this does grow, then maybe these can be, part of the recruiting pool for the U.S. Space Force that we talked about a couple of weeks ago. So it seems like a natural pipeline there.
Or depending on their tax structure, it could be where Apple and other companies put their headquarters so that they don't have to pay corporate taxes anymore.
Yeah, we're not even on the planet. You can't tax us.
Exactly. What can we possibly owe you?
All right, great stuff, Rodney. Looking ahead to, this is all we had for this week. Looking ahead to next week, the only thing really on our minds is U.S. inflation. Do you have anything else that you're taking a look at other than the normal following the trade war, stuff like that?
No, it's very quiet. CPI should be the only thing. It's the dead of summer. Anybody who's anybody, which of course doesn't include me and you because we're here, is at the beach. So,
well, we at least have the weekends.
Exactly.
All right, Rodney, thanks for joining me this week. Thank you all for watching, and we'll see you all again next week.